Well, thanks, Kevin, and good evening to everybody who's on the webinar this evening, and thanks to Health Watch USA for inviting me to share our family's story and the lessons it holds. As this group knows better than anyone, there are real life and death consequences to the issues being discussed here tonight. So I hope at the end of our time together that I leave some nuggets and some thoughts to help inspire the work you do on behalf of patients and the American public. So how did I get into this? Well, my life 14 years ago looked very different than it does today. I was married to my best friend, had a successful career in advertising, traveled the world on productions, and was planning to have a family. However, all that changed with one phone call. On August 6, 2003, my world came crashing down. I was out of town on business when I got a call from my dad telling me that Woody, my husband of almost 10 years, was found hanging from the rafters of our garage, dead at age 37. Woody, my best friend, the guy I was supposed to grow old with, was gone. Woody wasn't depressed, nor did Woody have a history of depression, suicidality, or any other mental illness. Woody had a huge personality, outgoing, smart, gregarious. He lit up a room when he walked in. He had just started his dream job as vice president of sales with a startup company and 2 months prior, and so he was having trouble sleeping, which is not uncommon for entrepreneurs. And Woody was a guy who needed 8 hours of sleep. He was notorious for always falling asleep at dinner, like if he didn't have his sleep. So having trouble sleeping was definitely something that Woody was struggling with. So he went to his general physician, his doctor that he's trusted, has seen for years, and was given the antidepressant Zoloft, off-label for insomnia. The doctor said Zoloft would help take the edge off and help him sleep. So Woody left, took it home, and 5 weeks later, Woody took his own life. The 3-week sample pack that Woody came home with automatically doubled the dose, unbeknownst to him, from 25 to 50 milligrams after week 1. There was no cautionary warning given to him or me about the fact of being closely monitored when first going on an antidepressant or when dosages change. In fact, I was out of the country for the first 3 weeks he was on this drug. So I wasn't even there to even see him. And within days, Woody experienced all the side effects that you saw in the advertisements, like night sweats, diarrhea, worsened insomnia, which I find ironic because that was the reason he got it. But he also experienced something else called akathisia, which is a side effect that was known to Pfizer, but not to Woody nor his doctor or family. Shortly before Woody died, I found Woody curled up in a fetal position on our kitchen floor, holding his head like a vice, crying, Kim, you gotta help me. I don't know what's happening. It's like my body's outside my body, head's outside my body looking in. Kim, you gotta help me. And I remember, I was scared myself, but we calmed him down. We called his doctor. We did yoga breathing, just got him to calm down, and called his doctor. And his doctor said, you got to give it 4 to 6 weeks for the drug to kick in. Woody lasted 1 week more, a total of 5 weeks. Woody and I never questioned the drug. Why would we? Zoloft was FDA approved, given to him by his doctor, and was advertised and sold as safe and effective. From the beginning, Woody's death made no sense to anyone who knew him, including all of his friends, me. Why would a guy who loved life take his own life? But everywhere I turned, the so-called experts, the suicide support groups were telling me Woody was depressed. He must have been. But in the deepest part of me, I knew something didn't add up. Well, how did a guy go from not being able to sleep to experiencing head outside the body? Ironically, the day Woody was found, the front page of our Minneapolis Star-Tribune had an article that said the UK finds link between antidepressants and suicide in teens. Then the coroner asked if he was taking any drugs, and the only drug he was on was Zoloft. So she said, I need to take the drug with me. It might have something to do with his death. So immediately my brother-in-law went home and started to Google Zoloft and suicide, and all this information came up. So it was the only thing that was initially different in his life. So we started on the journey for the truth, which has taken me to the FDA, HHS, Congress, and at this time there was a lot of FDA hearings around antidepressants and suicide. It also took me to the courts. I had a wrongful death lawsuit against Pfizer. And it also took me to the media. And it was a story that had to be out there, had to be told. And at this point, it was still a new thing. But unfortunately, during this whole time, I learned that Woody was not an isolated case, or anecdotal, as the FDA likes to call us. I found this ironic because the FDA first held hearings in 1991 on Prozac and the link to suicide. This was 13 years before the FDA eventually put black box warning on the drugs for children in 2004. In the battle for Woody, we were able to get confidential internal Pfizer and other drug company and FDA documents made public that showed that they knew about the risk of suicide, violence, and not to speak of the questionable efficacy, but failed to tell the public, including physicians. In fact, I hand-delivered these documents to the FDA and members of the Congress and the media. And some of these that are on here, and I'd be more than happy to share them, but there was one from Prozac in Germany that was in 1995. It was not approved initially for two reasons: risk of suicide and lack of efficacy. And eventually it did get approved after the FDA approved it, and it was in conjunction with a benzo to calm the probably that side effect of akathisia. So I would be more than happy to share some of these with you. But it's hard not to do something with these documents when you've seen these company documents, FDA documents in black and white on their letterhead with your own eyes, and you've experienced the ultimate loss that I have. It was too late for our family, but these documents speak for themselves. But I had to do, like I've always believed, that if one family was informed, Woody's life and death has made a difference. So initially, my advocacy was really focused on getting black box warnings added to antidepressants. But I quickly realized that this issue with antidepressants was actually a much bigger issue, a systemic problem with our overall drug safety system in our country. It's being driven by commercial interests, issues with transparency, conflicts of interest, the influence of industry marketing and advertising, manipulation of clinical trials, ghostwriters and key opinion leaders that are writing the articles and studies that appear in medical journals, the FDA approval process and how much politics are behind it, the role of Congress and legislation in our drug safety, as well as lawsuits. All of this was going on behind the scene while the average everyday person like Woody and me and the public goes into their doctor and trusts that they are being given a drug, device, or treatment that is supposed to be safe and effective. Unfortunately, too many of us have learned the hard way that this is just not true. So I believe Woody's story holds many lessons. The first is the inherent built-in trust. Woody did what most Americans do. They put their faith and trust in their doctor and assume that the FDA-approved drug being prescribed will do more help than harm. Number two, too quick to prescribe and recommend a drug. Really, should meds have been the first line of treatment to deal with Woody? Should that have even been the right drug? Or were there other evidence-based non-drug treatments like diet, exercise, yoga, option of doing nothing at all that should have been tried first? I personally blame the influence of industry marketing and direct-to-consumer advertising in creating this quick fix pill culture that we've just kind of accepted. Number three, the lack of recognition or understanding of drug side effects. what he was calling about the side effect, head outside the body. And I've heard through all my years since then that people will have a side effect, and unfortunately, when they go to the doctor and describe it, it often gets treated with layering more drugs on top to deal with the side effect that was actually from the drug initially prescribed. So, and then the idea of samples. Woody was given a 3-week sample pack. There was no discussion about warnings. There was no meaningful conversation. And even if it did, there was a big piece of the puzzle that was missing, and that was the side effect akathisia. That to really truly assess the risks associated with taking this powerful mind-altering drug. This is why shared decision-making and true informed consent is so important in the relationship with doctor and patient. Off-label, you heard me mention that off-label is a huge problem. Patients have no idea that a drug is not even approved for the condition. They don't even know what to ask. A recent study of 457 primary care physicians and psychiatrists found that many mistakenly thought common unapproved uses for certain drugs were FDA approved. So I think the doctors just assume, and the FDA will always tell us that they're not in the business of regulating physicians. And yes, there are certain times that off-label is a good thing. But there are other times, like a lot of times with the antidepressants. Antidepressants are often used off-label for everything from pain, things that have, you might have a migraine. Now they're given for hot flashes, and they're disguised as a new drug, but they're actually antidepressants. And I'm hearing that one is being prescribed quite frequently to middle-aged women. So unfortunately, many physicians are misinformed also about the dangers of antidepressants, and often are so cavalier about the use and believe there really are no risks in the adult population. They are not benign, and they shouldn't be taken like a daily vitamin. And unfortunately, they are. So I also think there's a lack of understanding of how the FDA approval process works. I was shocked to learn in my working with physicians that the overall general FDA approval process isn't taught in med school. And the FDA approval process is often very political, and many of the members on the FDA advisory panels have financial conflicts of interest. Last year, I was appointed the consumer representative on the FDA Psychopharmacologic Drugs Advisory Committee, and I have witnessed the politics and industry influence firsthand. I'm often the lone wolf on the committee that just doesn't rubber stamp, approve, or recommend an approval. Not only do I challenge the science or the mechanics or results of the study, but I also look at the potential marketing of the drug. Take, for example, it was last year, the FDA Approval Committee reviewing pimavanserin, which was a new drug for Parkinson's psychosis. It had previously failed FDA approval twice before, but then it went back to the FDA to get approval using a fast tracking mechanism called breakthrough therapy designation, which basically is a new pathway to get drugs to the market faster as long as there's no drug on the market to currently treat that condition. So the company used this new pathway, and with this new pathway, there is no required minimum of participants in a clinical trial. So this was happening, but I thought I would also see what the Wall Street analysts had to say about this drug. And I learned that many of the analysts said that this drug had the potential to be a $2 to $3 billion a year off-label drug. So here's this drug company using a fast-tracking approval mechanism, and yet it's going to be, really it's about getting it to the market with the potential of $2 to $3 billion. So that is something I think I'd love to see FDA approval process taught in med school so that we can have doctors critically thinking when they hear about drug approvals that there might be some other politics or something else behind it as well that they should at least inquire about. The power of lawsuits in public health. I know it scares doctors every time I say we need to work with lawyers, but contrary to what most people think, the legal system is the only way that you can get inside a company files. The government, Congress, the FDA cannot. And there are many documents that often lie in the basement of files, in the file drawer cabinets of these companies. Take, for instance, the recent Dolan v. GSK Paxil suicide. The lawyers were able to show documents that showed GSK has hidden adult suicides and manipulated original clinical trials from the late 80s. And these documents now, because of the actual case that went to trial, are now in the public domain and are no longer buried in files. Now, contrast that to what happened to last year's FDA removal of the black box warnings for the psychiatric side effects of Chantix. And Chantix litigation, it's a Pfizer drug. They learned from the antidepressant litigation that the power of people telling their stories. They also knew a lot of documents got out from under seal because lawyers were pretty smart in figuring out how to do that. So what did they do? Before they went to the FDA to try to get the black box warning removed, they had quietly settled over 3,300 lawsuits and shut the victims and their lawyers up forever, not allowing them to be able to testify and tell their stories in public. So nobody showed up at the Chantix FDA hearings. And I know a couple of the expert witnesses that reviewed the documents, and they said there are some really bad public health documents that are forever sealed. So we need to work, because I think that's bad for not only public health, but doctors as well. So I think we need to think about that. That is something I would like to continue to do. And lastly, and I didn't realize this before getting involved in this, but really the influence of AstroTurf patient disease advocacy groups. And I call them AstroTurf because they're basically helping promote the drug, whether indirectly or not, like all the anti-smoking groups that came out in support of removing the Chantix black box warning, or the Parkinson's groups that came and, in well-intentioned, but if you actually dig deeper, a lot of these companies are promoting this because, and then you go look at their funders, and they're being funded by the drug companies and the device companies. So I think this is another source of influence that patients and physicians are unaware of or don't really think about when going in. So those are some of the lessons. I'm sure there's probably many others that people could add to it, but these are ones that I have found and continue to advocate for. So, as I like to say, healthcare is a system. We know it's a system, it's a network, but we have to remember we're still treating individuals. All of us make up the healthcare ecosystem, and I believe that we need to work with people inside and outside the system. Many of the people I work with are a bunch of patient safety advocates across the country, like Kevin and many others that are on this call tonight, that work on a variety of issues. Many of them have come into this work as a result of harm or adverse experiences. Some are working on device safety, like Essure, the morcellators, implantables, antibiotics, hospital-acquired infections, hospital safety, transparency, opioids, informed consent, electronic health records. The list goes on and on, but I'm so glad that there are other people working on it because this is a huge, huge problem. So I've always said that I believe the experts, we need to change how we talk about it. I believe good ideas come from anywhere. I believe that we need to shift the paradigm from the experts are in the white coat to the experts are in the room, and that includes all of us. And I know this personally in my job as a producer. I can only get the end product with this philosophy. We cannot work in silos. Everyone has a role and has an ability to contribute to the process. So I've definitely approached my advocacy through this lens. I sometimes think I have a little bit of a rose-colored lens, but I'm an optimist, but I also know that it works. And so I've applied this in our Selling Sickness conference, in our advocacy, that we all have to work together and we all have a role. So I think it's an opportunity. And I'm going to give you just one example. Last year, I was able to blend my two worlds, my marketing, advertising, professional background with my advocacy in a project that I was able to do for the Minnesota Hospital Association. And it was for their patient and family engagement campaign. That was, I believe they were part of the several hospitals that received funding through the ACA. But I credit the Minnesota Hospital Association for having the insight of hiring a non-traditional ad agency that doesn't work in the normal healthcare space. So they don't talk the normal lingo of healthcare. And so we were able to approach this assignment like we would any other client that we take on. And we did all kinds of interviews and conversations with key stakeholders. And we were able to craft this mantra that was really that they used in the Minnesota Hospital Association family engagement work at the hospital level across the state. So I thought I would read it because I love it, and I think this is a real goal. Include always. That's what we aim to do. Include patients and families at every level throughout the healthcare system. Through conversations, sharing ideas, and inviting the patient in, the outcome will be better healthcare for everyone. We're not launching a campaign that begins and ends. Together, we are creating a cultural shift, a unified mindset where the patient is truly one of us. It's a whole new healthcare approach. It takes a whole lot of change. It takes courage, and it takes all of us working together to make the system the best it can be. We will listen more, engage often, and include always. So it's been interesting to see how the Include Always has been influencing the patient safety work done in Minnesota. And you can actually check it out at their website. I don't have any involvement in it anymore because we were really brought in to help kind of create an umbrella campaign. But the website is includealways.org. So in closing, I'd just like to thank you for listening and being open to some of these ideas that were presented. And at minimum, I hope you remember Woody's story, because his story represents thousands and thousands of others, like Candace, Stuart, Natalie, Shane, Joe, Jakey. These people and their families have lived every day with the consequences of a flawed healthcare system. We all matter. They matter. And unfortunately, sometimes the best learnings and opportunities for improvement come from medical errors, harms, death, and can come from someone outside the system. So this is why we have to be willing to work together and be willing to work with people who have lived with the harms, because the people I work with every day, my advocates, fellow advocates, have amazing ideas. So I think it's time to infuse a little healthy skepticism into our healthcare and dig deeper and challenge the status quo, because it's not working. There are real lives that are paying the consequences.